Emma Parker pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her as she stepped out of St. Luke's Hospital for the last time. The October wind sliced through the thin fabric, chilling her to the bone, but it was the ache in her chest that hurt more. 5 years of her life, countless overtime shifts, sleepless nights, and moments spent holding the hands of patients who had no one else, had been reduced to a single, curt conversation. "We appreciate your service, Emma, but due to budget cuts," her supervisor's words echoed in her mind, sharp and hollow, like a cruel punchline. A termination letter, folded neatly in her pocket, was all she had to show for her dedication. Tears stung her eyes as she navigated the crowded Manhattan streets, the city's relentless pulse indifferent to her unraveling world. New York didn't pause for anyone, least of all a jobless nurse with rent due in a week and savings that wouldn't last a month. The weight of it all pressed down on her, bills piling up on her tiny kitchen table, the looming specter of job applications, and the nagging fear that she'd never find her footing again. She barely registered the chaos around her until a frantic shout cut through her thoughts. "Somebody, help him!" Emma's head snapped up. A crowd had gathered near the sidewalk, their voices a mix of panic and helplessness. Instinct kicked in, her training overriding the fog of despair. She pushed through the onlookers, her heart racing, and dropped to her knees beside a man collapsed on the pavement. His face was ashen, his lips tinged blue. She pressed her fingers to his neck, weak pulse, shallow breaths. His life was slipping away. Without hesitation, Emma began CPR. 1, 2, 3, she counted, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. The world around her blurred, the honking taxis, the murmurs of the crowd, the weight of her own uncertain future. All that mattered was the rhythm of her compressions, the desperate hope of bringing him back. Minutes stretched into eternity, her arms burning, her breath ragged. Then, a miracle, his body jerked, a sharp gasp tearing through his lungs. The crowd exhaled in collective relief, their murmurs turning to cheers. Emma sat back on her heels, her hands trembling as adrenaline ebbed away. She didn't wait for thanks or linger for the paramedics. She rose, brushed off her coat, and slipped back into the flow of the city, the moment replaying in her mind like a vivid dream. She'd done what any nurse would do, but something about it felt different, a spark of purpose reignited in the ashes of her loss. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the grimy window of Emma's cramped Brooklyn apartment. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at a stack of unpaid bills, rent, utilities, student loans. Her savings, meager as they were, wouldn't stretch far. Job hunting could take weeks, maybe months, in a city oversaturated with nurses and underfunded hospitals. Her phone buzzed, startling her. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Is this Emma Parker?" The voice was deep, polished, with an edge of authority. "Yes," she said cautiously. "My name is James Lawson. You saved my father's life yesterday." Emma's grip tightened on the phone. She hadn't even seen the man's face clearly, just a blur of urgency and instinct. How is he?" she asked. "He's stable, thanks to you." A pause. "I'd like to meet you." "That's not necessary," Emma said quickly. "I was just—" "Please," James interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "You don't understand. You saved a very important man. I need to see you." Before she could argue, he gave her an address, a high-end cafe in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of place she'd never set foot in. 2 hours later, Emma walked into the cafe, her worn-out sneakers and thrift store coat starkly out of place among the polished clientele. James Lawson was waiting at a corner table, tall and impeccably dressed, his sharp blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made her uneasy. "I'm grateful for what you did," he said as she sat down, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "But I need to ask, why did you walk away?" Emma shifted uncomfortably. "I'm a nurse. Saving people is what I do." James leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You didn't know who he was, did you?" She shook her head, confused. "Should I have?" James smiled faintly. "My father is Richard Lawson, CEO of Lawson Enterprises. One of the wealthiest men in New York." Emma blinked, the name vaguely familiar from headlines she'd never bothered to read. Billionaires and their empires were a world apart from hers. Before she could respond, James slid an envelope across the table. "Consider this a token of gratitude." Her fingers hesitated before opening it. Inside was a check for $250,000. Her breath caught, her heart pounding. This wasn't real. I can't take this, she stammered, pushing the envelope back. James's expression hardened. You can, and you should. But that's not all. Emma looked at him warily. What do you mean? He leaned back, his voice measured. This is only the beginning. Emma sat on the edge of her bed that night, the check and a sleek black business card James had given her resting on her nightstand. $250,000. It could clear her debts, cover rent for years, give her breathing room to find a new job. But something about it felt wrong, too easy, too surreal. Why her? She'd saved a life, yes, but nurses did that every day. What did James mean by the beginning? The card bore an address for Lawson Enterprises, a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of Manhattan. James had asked her to come the next morning at 9 a.m. to meet his father. Curiosity battled with caution, but by dawn, Emma had made her decision. She needed answers. The subway ride uptown felt like a journey into another world. The Lawson Enterprises building loomed ahead, its sleek facade a symbol of wealth and power. Inside, the lobby was a vision of opulence, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and people who moved with the confidence of those who belonged. Emma, in her simple blouse and coat, felt like an imposter. A receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile. Miss Parker, Mr. Lawson is expecting you. A private elevator whisked her to the top floor, where she stepped into an office that seemed to command the city itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking view of the New York skyline. Behind a massive desk sat Richard Lawson, the man she'd saved. His silver hair was neatly combed, his suit impeccable, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, pinned her in place. You must be Emma Parker, he said, his voice deep and commanding. Yes, sir, she replied, her voice smaller than she intended. Richard motioned for her to sit. I owe you my life. Emma shook her head. I was just doing what any nurse would do. He smirked, a glint of amusement in his eyes. Most people would have walked away. You didn't. That tells me something about you. Emma swallowed, unsure how to respond. I wasn't expecting anything in return. Richard nodded slowly. And that's exactly why I want to offer you something. Her stomach tightened. Offer me what? Richard gestured to James, who had been standing silently by the window. My son tells me you're an exceptional nurse. Emma's brows furrowed. I lost my job. Their loss, Richard said dismissively. But my gain. He paused, his gaze unwavering. I want you to work for me. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Work for you. As what? My personal medical advisor. Live in, full benefits, triple what you were making before. Her breath caught. The offer was staggering, beyond anything she'd ever imagined. But something in Richard's tone, in the intensity of his gaze, made her pause. Why me? She asked. Richard's lips curled into a knowing smile. Because I trust you, Emma. And trust is a rare commodity in my world. That night, Emma lay awake, the weight of Richard's offer pressing down on her. Triple her salary, a guest house on his estate, a life of stability she'd never known. But his words, trust is a rare commodity, echoed in her mind, tinged with an unspoken warning. What kind of world was she stepping into? Lawson Enterprises was a titan in finance, real estate, and technology, but whispers of its ruthlessness, of deals made in shadows, lingered in the headlines she'd skimmed over the years. By morning, she'd made her choice. She couldn't afford to say no, not with bills piling up and no other prospects. But she needed clarity. She returned to Lawson Enterprises, where James met her in the lobby, a grin spreading across his face. I was hoping you'd come, he said. I want to say yes, Emma replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. But I need to understand exactly what this job entails. James's grin faded into something more serious. My father will explain everything. In Richard's office, the air felt heavier than the day before. He studied her with the same piercing gaze. You've made a decision. Emma nodded. I'll take the job, but I need clarity. Richard's lips curled into a small smile. Good. He stood and walked to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back. This isn't just about medical care, Emma. I need someone I can trust, someone who won't ask too many questions. Emma stiffened. What do you mean? Richard chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. Nothing illegal, if that's what you're worried about. But my life comes with complications. Her heartbeat quickened. Complications. James stepped forward, his tone softer. You'll be my father's personal medical advisor, traveling when necessary, ensuring his health is monitored at all times. You'll live in the guest house on our estate in Westchester. Live in, Emma repeated, the reality sinking in. Richard nodded. Consider it part of your compensation. I prefer my team close. The word team sent a chill down her spine. She was stepping into a world of wealth and power, one she barely understood. But with no other options, she extended her hand. I'm in. Richard's grip was firm, his smile enigmatic. You won't regret it. The next week was a whirlwind. Emma packed her meager belongings and moved into the guest house on the Lawson estate, a sprawling property that felt like a different planet from her cramped Brooklyn apartment. The guest house alone was larger than any home she'd ever lived in, with sleek furniture, a private garden, and a view of rolling hills. But the luxury couldn't erase her unease. Her role was straightforward at first, monitoring Richard's health, managing his medications, accompanying him to appointments. He'd had a heart condition for years, he explained, one that required constant vigilance. But as the days passed, Emma noticed the complications Richard had mentioned. Late-night meetings in his study, guarded by men in suits who never smiled. Cryptic phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room. And James, always watching her, as if gauging her loyalty. One evening, as she checked Richard's blood pressure in his study, he broke the silence. You're settling in well, Emma. She nodded, focusing on the cuff. It's different. He chuckled. You'll get used to it. But tell me, do you ever think about that day on the sidewalk? Her hands paused. All the time. You didn't hesitate, he said, his voice softer now. Why? Emma met his gaze. Because it's who I am. I don't think, I act. Richard nodded, something unreadable in his eyes. That's why you're here. Before she could ask what he meant, the door opened, and James entered, holding an envelope. This came for you, he said, handing it to her. The envelope was thick, embossed with gold, and bore the seal of the Preston Foundation. Emma's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter. Dear Miss Emma Parker, we are honored to inform you that you have been selected as the recipient of the Preston Humanitarian Award for your exceptional act of selflessness in saving a life. Along with this award, you will receive a $500,000 grant to continue your work in saving lives and assisting those in need. Your kindness has inspired countless others. We hope this reward helps you build the future you deserve. With gratitude, the Preston Foundation. Tears streamed down Emma's face. Just weeks ago, she'd been jobless, drowning in debt. Now, she was living on a billionaire's estate, with a check for $250,000 and an award that could change her life. Outside, 4 sleek cars lined the driveway, representatives from hospitals and organizations, all eager to meet her. A woman in a navy suit stepped forward. Miss Parker, I'm Drive. Emily Sanders from St. John's Medical Center. We'd be honored if you joined our team. Name your position, name your salary. A tall man followed. I represent a private medical institution. We can fund your own practice, if that's what you want. Emma's head spun. She turned to Richard, who watched her with that same knowing smile. Why are you doing this for me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, his voice low. Because when I was dying on that sidewalk, you didn't see a billionaire. You saw a man who needed help. The world needs more people like you, Emma. And I won't let someone like you go unnoticed. Emma's heart swelled, tears blurring her vision. She'd spent years giving everything to others, never expecting anything in return. Now, life was giving back in ways she'd never dreamed possible. As she looked at the faces around her, the opportunities unfolding, she whispered to herself, this is just the beginning.